Hello and welcome. I'm Danny, and today Great.com talks with Krista Karkovic, the CEO of MYTIME Young Carers. Haven't heard of them yet? They are a UK-based charity that exists to support young carers aged between 5 and 25. Before we begin, remember, when you hear this podcast, please subscribe and you will learn your podcast. Hi, Krista, and welcome.
Hi, thanks. Thank you so much for having me.
It's a pleasure. I'm looking forward to know more about you guys. And let's begin about your history, right? The genesis. Tell us all about how my time came into existence.
So, My Time was actually founded about 10 years ago by a man called Matthew Barker. And the reason that he founded My Time was because the charity had previously existed for years and years and years as an outdoor activity centre. And we'd stopped using the centre as for that purpose. But what happened was that groups of young carers were coming to stay there. And Matt didn't know who young carers were, didn't know what they did, like many people in the world and across the UK. And actually, when he found out a little bit more about the types of roles that they play, the responsibilities that they have, he could see that there was a really important gap of support, particularly in the area that we live in the UK, but it is similar across the UK. So he founded My Time Young Carers. And for the first 5 or 6 years of its life, the charity mainly provided opportunities for young carers to come and take a break from their caring role and stay at the centre. And then I was really lucky in 2019, I got asked if I would be involved. And I come from a background in education. And we, as a board and as a charity, decided that we wanted to scale what we were doing. And My Time now exists as it does.
That's amazing, actually. And I'm really interested in knowing about this shift because I think talking more about maybe your background in education has sort of shaped a little bit of how your projects go. But before we go in there, maybe if you could help us understand better what young carer is. Because as you mentioned, and I myself, I include myself into this, I might have some doubt of what exactly makes someone a young carer, especially when we think about someone as little as a 5-year-old. That's really young.
Yeah, it is strange considering when I explain who young carers are, when you think about them as being 5 years old, it can be quite challenging. Um, so the definition of a young carer in the UK is a young person who has a caring responsibility for somebody in their family. So it could be a parent, sometimes it's both parents, it might be a grandparent, or it could be a sibling, so brother or sister, or multiple versions of that. And the types of caring or the reasons that young carers are caring, it can be anything from somebody having a physical disability, having a learning need. It could be that they misuse drugs or alcohol. It might be that they're struggling with their mental health. And again, often young carers are caring for somebody or multiple members of their family who experience lots of those different things. So young carers, they provide lots of different types of support. And the most obvious type of support that gets talked about most frequently is the actual practical caregiving that they're involved in. So that might be helping somebody move around the home, using the shower, using the toilet. But there are other types of caring that they're involved in, which often are not spoken about. And that can be the emotional care that they provide for the people that they look after. So to illustrate that, I was having a conversation recently with a young carer. She was 6, and she said to me, I was talking to her about her caring role at home, and she looks after her mum. And I said to her, so what do you do? And she said, well, my job is to keep mummy happy. I said, well, what do you mean? And she said, well, mummy can often get really sad, so my job is to make sure that she's happy. And I said, well, how do you do that? And she said, well, I cheer her up. I make sure that she's comfortable. I talk to her about all the things that are worrying her. And as I was listening, I was really moved by the fact that this 6-year-old understood that her kindness and her love was really important, but also it was quite hard to hear because she prioritizes her mum's well-being over her own. And so the conversation went on, and I said to her, "And what do you do when you're sad? Like, what do you do when you find this difficult?" And she said, "Oh, that's when I go to my room and I'm on my own and I cry in my room." And she really felt the expectation that actually she needed to stay cheerful and positive in front of her mum so as not to exacerbate her mum's condition. So another part of caring that often again isn't talked about is that young carers can be responsible for administering medication and for attending doctor's appointments and things like that. And that again can be quite problematic in that healthcare professionals, they're busy people, and it can obviously be quite strange for them to talk to a young person about the parent's medication that they're going to be taking. But actually, again, as a young carer spoke to me about it, he said, they changed my father's medication and they don't tell me it's changed. And he gets quite muddled, dad. And so actually, it would be really helpful if the doctor was able to explain to me what medication he needs to take, when he needs to take it, in what dose. And so young carers are responsible for a huge amount of things across their family. And one of the things that we see a lot is that often, particularly if there is a young person caring for a parent, if that parent's unwell, they might not be able to parent as effectively the other children in the family. So they often take on caregiving roles for other siblings, and it could be younger siblings or older siblings. And in the UK and across the world, traditionally we see that actually it's more girls that are involved in the caring role. But that doesn't mean that boys aren't doing it. It just means that they're less likely to talk about it, because caregiving is traditionally seen as a female role.
I love that you brought this perspective because I think that we would tend to think, oh yes, of course, it's a woman's job. Take care of the family, with the whole sexist argument that we have. But to think of it as the boys are not speaking out, they don't feel it's still sexist to think about it, but it's in a different, it goes to a different perspective. So thank you for bringing that. And it's quite complex situation. I mean, you would need lots of prompts to actually be able to really give them sustainable change, since they would go back home and still face that reality. So
Yeah.
I'm going to use that to jump to knowing more about programs that you're doing. What is the help that you're able to offer to them?
Well, this tallies in with what we started talking about earlier, which was my background in education. So I taught in schools across the UK for 13 years before I became involved in the charity. And actually, not once as a teacher was I ever provided with any training or awareness of who young carers were. And so I would have had young carers in my classroom and not known that that was the role that they played. And there was one young lady that I taught, and she won't mind me sharing this story, who she was often absent from school. She often struggled with her own health a little bit. She got poorly quite often. And I taught her on and off for nearly 3 years. And it wasn't until I met her mum at parents' evening that I became aware of the fact that she was a young carer. And so her mum had been she was a military veteran. She'd been serving in Afghanistan, had been injured there. And this young lady had a huge amount of responsibility at home in terms of providing both physical and emotional support to mum. Now, as her teacher, I made her life more difficult without even knowing I was doing it. So when she wasn't at school, she would be greeted with me at the door of the classroom saying, "Oh, you weren't in the lesson yesterday. You've really got to come to school. It's really important that you're here. GCSE years, you've got lots of work to do." And so actually all I was doing was really doubling down the amount of pressure that young lady was under. And when I met her mum on parents' evening and I realized the dynamic of the situation, then my relationship with her changed, because instead of not understanding why she wasn't in school, I had a level of empathy that meant, "Oh, you weren't here yesterday. Don't worry. I've put the work from yesterday's lesson on your desk. I won't ask you any questions for the first 10, 15 minutes of the lesson. You just have a read through of what we did, and then you can catch up." And actually, my relationship with her really flourished and it really changed. And when I got involved with the charity, it was schools was one of the areas that they felt that more work needed to be done. And so we call it our Level Up program. And essentially, we provide schools with the training and the support that they need to really change the culture and the fabric of the school in terms of the way they recognise and then support young carers. And when we first started, I was really lucky in that the team from my old school all built, and the young carers that were at that school, they all helped build that programme. So we really considered every element of what a young carer's experience at school was like. And, you know, lots of them talked about the fact they'd often be late for school. So if they woke up in the morning, mum wasn't having a good day or dad wasn't having a good day, they might then end up having to organise breakfast for the other siblings, drop the other siblings at school, which would inevitably make them late. They'd turn up at school, teacher would be stood on the gate saying, "You're late, here's your detention for after school because you've been late." And then actually that was then going to impact their ability to pick up their siblings from school later in the day. And so we worked as a team. We looked at how we could improve that relationship in terms of punctuality, what we could do about attendance, and then what support young carers needed in terms of their well-being. And so the program, the Level Up program, is designed to essentially provide all of the things that young carers need, and we call them reasonable adjustments. So what reasonable adjustments can be made? And now it's really important as well that we don't lower the expectations for young carers, in that just because you're a young carer doesn't mean that you shouldn't be given the same opportunity. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't be pushed to do as well as you are able to, but actually having the support and the understanding within schools is key. And it was something that came up time and time again when talking to young carers, that school is the pressure point, because what they say is school never seems to understand that the person that I care for is the most important thing in my world. And then the school it fits around that. And so imagine you're a young carer who you've got 4 lots of homework to hand in one day, and you've been at the hospital the night before because the person you care for was unwell. You might end up with a detention from every single one of those teachers not doing your homework. And then effectively young carers were explaining to us they felt like they were being punished for their caring role. And so what we've done is open the dialogue. So we've talked to teachers about who young carers are. We've explained some of the challenges that they face. And then we work with every tier within the school. So what I mean by that is we work with the leadership team, we work with classroom teachers, we work with teaching assistants, and support staff. So staff that work in the canteen, to really help them to understand what are those reasonable adjustments they can make that will make coming to school a more positive experience, and that they're effectively not being punished for caring. So from that schools programme, we actually initially set it up with 6 schools. We're now working with over 200 nationally, and it's going really well, so that's great. Dan, that leads it, is a former teacher and a former young carer himself. And obviously his lived experience in both elements is so key. And his team do a fantastic job of really helping, as I say, the dialogue to open up. Like, who are these young people? What do they need? And as a school, how can we support them? And from there, what's happened is that in lots of the schools that we work in, they might tell us that they think they know they've got 1, maybe 2 young carers. And one of the schools that we've been working with for the last 2 years, they went from knowing about 2 young carers to then having 30. And then we've just re-delivered training in that school, and they've gone up to having 90. And that accounts for about 10% of their school population. So this affects way more young people than we'd even realised, but schools had realised. And so from there, once those young carers are identified, then the school can support them, but also they're able to access the other programs that MYTIME delivers. So we have a Making Memories program, and the Making Memories program it has 2 elements to it. So the first is giving young carers a break from their caring role. So doing things that are fun, making sure that they get to have the same kind of opportunities during school holidays and youth clubs. So we have an online youth group that we run, so that they really can have some fun, but with other young people that get exactly what it is that they're going through, even if it's in a different context. And then the other piece that we deliver is an employability program, and that's for the 16 sort of to 25-year-old young carers. And that came about because there was a piece of research done based in the UK that revealed that 49% of young adult carers in that age group were not in education, not in training, and not in employment. And that statistic is terrifying, because these are exceptional young people who have a huge amount of skills, a huge amount in terms of empathy, maturity, But what we were seeing was that their life chances were being hindered by the fact that they were a young carer. And when we sort of delved into why, a lot of what we heard was that the transition from school into college and further education was difficult, and that the information that schools held about them often wasn't passed on to their further education establishments, but also that the pastoral systems there that support them outside of their learning were not as aware. So, for example, one of the local colleges we work with, they have 5,000 students from 16 through to 21. And actually, they felt like they were being lost within a bigger system, which totally makes sense. So we've worked really hard with the college to be able to improve that support so that there is a really good transition from school into college. And the other thing that we were seeing was that young carers were saying employers weren't offering the flexibility that they needed to be able to provide the caring role that is so important, but also to be able to be successful at work. And then the other piece is that lots of young carers, and this is a nationwide issue and probably a global one, their caring role, by the time they become 18, they have been doing it for such a long time that there's a phrase that Professor Solbecker coined, and he's the young carer world expert in young carers. He calls it institutionalized caring. And actually by them, they've been caring for so long that they can't imagine what it looks like not to care. And also the relationships between them and the person that they care for can often be very, very strong. And so there's fear on both sides. There's fear for the young carer to leave and go to university, but there's also fear on the person that they cares for side that they're going to go. And so there was one young man that his story will stay with me forever. He and I were talking about what was he going to do after he'd been to college? Was he going to go to university? And he was really sat on the fence about it. And I thought he was being just a typical teenage boy, like doesn't know what he wants. And the more we talked, the more I understood. And he said, I actually really want to be a doctor. And I was like, that's amazing. That's a great thing to want to do. He said, but I can't. I said, well, what do you mean you can't? He said, well, they don't offer medicine at the local university in our town that we live in. So I can't go to university. And I said, well, but they do offer medicine at other universities. He said, yeah, but I can't leave my mum. And he wanted to become a doctor because he wanted to understand how to help people with the condition that she has, but he couldn't see how to leave. And actually, I'm really pleased to say he did our employability program, and he is now at university, and he is now training to be a doctor, and that's amazing. But it was complex on both sides. He felt a lot of guilt about the idea of leaving, and I think his mum, who he cared for, felt a lot of fear about how she would cope when he did leave. So the three programs are really holistic. They all work alongside each other. And what we're aiming to do now is to scale those programs nationally so that particularly the schools work takes place across the UK, because there is so much work to be done, and there are still so many young carers that we don't know about that aren't being supported by either us or their local project for young carers.
I'm really in awe here. It's really beautiful to see how your purpose can integrate. As you said, they are holistic, and they are not so concerned about changing the situation, because I have the sense that such a complex thing, it's kind of hard to change every child family, every child household, but you can maybe work in a structure that works with them. So this is really, really amazing. And I'm really happy to see how much your numbers have grown. I mean, it's sad to think that we can actually now identify more kids going through this. But on the other hand, maybe if we are able to identify more, we are able to help more, right?
Yeah,
so
exactly.
And it goes hand in hand. It's really, really, really. I mean, I'm sorry, because I keep
Well, it's a
wondering
really
about this.
interesting debate that and academics in this space and certain organizations within the space would say that young carers shouldn't exist. And in an ideal social system, they wouldn't, because that care would be provided by the state. However, that is not the reality, and it is a long, long way off, if it's ever a reality. So actually, we discuss that, and what we have advocated for is the fact that these young carers that exist now need support now. Yes, the long-term goal but we are talking long term, would be that young carers wouldn't need to exist. But I would argue as well that even if the practical care was being provided by external agencies and by local authorities or by the government, the emotional care would still be taking place. And so in my mind, we need to do what we can now to safeguard the future for those young carers, because we cannot have this statistic that 49% are not in education, employment or training. That's not fair. And their caring role should not cost them their future. And so, yeah, we would advocate that those interventions and those programs are needed because those children exist. Until a social system exist where they're not needed, which I just can't picture, actually there's work to be done.
If I, well, I'm kind of getting the courage here to say what I'm going to say. You know, when we were talking, and I kept thinking about my father, and this is a personal note. He was a young carer, and I know the struggle. You know, I seen him, even though now he doesn't have to take care so much, it's still hard. You know, the scars are there because no one at the time, or, you know, it was ages ago, had actually this understanding, you know, had actual means to help out. So this is where I keep thinking, thank you for doing this. It's really life changing. It has an impact even in just one kid, which is not the case, but if it was just in one kid, the impact is massive. So thank you. And thinking about this and thinking about the long run, I gotta ask you, what are the best ways to help you guys keep going? How can our audience get involved with you?
So at the moment, we're exploring a partnership with another organisation called Social Finance, and their background is actually gathering really big data sets to explore patterns and explore trends, and what those things mean, and how you can then use that data to influence government and the policies that exist to support any group of people. So they've done work with refugees previously in the UK, for those that have survived domestic abuse, and actually they're focusing now their work on young carers. And so we are in a development phase where we look at, what does this data mean? What is it telling us? What's it telling us about the future? And therefore, what does the system need to look like to support young carers moving forward? So that's a really exciting piece of work. And alongside that, we're obviously looking at how we can scale the work that we're doing further. So there's probably two areas of support. The first, I mean, I always have to say it, is fundraising, in that we have huge ambition and huge potential if we're able to fund it. And so anybody that is able to point us in the right direction of people that might be interested in our work, particularly at systems level, and UK wide, that would be really helpful. And then the second thing is expertise and people's time. So we are quite a small group. There's about 20 of us that work on the team. Lots of us come from an education background. So we do lack experience often in terms of things like digital transformation, comms, marketing, those kind of things. So we're really interested in speaking to people that have time or skill sets that they can share with us that would help to further our cause and further the young carers cause. So yeah, those are the two ways that people can help.
That's wonderful. And if you're listening to us right now and got interested and want to learn more about what they do, check their page. It's MYTIMEYoungCarers.org. You can get more information. You can get in touch with them if you have any way to help, as Krista just mentioned. Please get in touch. I think we will all benefit from more hands into this project.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you, Krista. It was a great talk today. I learned a lot.
Thank you very much for having me.
And for everybody listening or watching, thank you also. And remember, if you enjoyed this episode, press subscribe on YouTube or in your podcast app, because that shows your algorithms that this is an important conversation and more people can learn about the importance of MYTIME Young Carers. Check their page, and well, I see you in the next episode. Bye.